Phone check. 1, 2. The microphone check. 1, 2, 1, 2. The microphone check. I got my headphones tuned between two different AM stations, and my briefcase is full of declassified information. Declassified. Declassified.
Good evening and welcome to News from Neptune for the fourth week of 2013. For more than 20 years, this program has been a spontaneous and unrehearsed discussion of the news of the week and its coverage by the media. First on a so-called community radio station, and when censored and locked out of there, welcomed, I'm happy to say, by the good people at Urbana Public Television. I'm Carl Estabrook. My discussants tonight are David Green and Ron Szoke. We'll take turns suggesting an item from the week's news that's been ignored or misreported, sometimes even innocently, and then giving the others a chance to comment on it. Our program's name, News from Neptune, was chosen to honor Noam Chomsky, who's been talking sense about American politics for more than twice the 20 years we've been on the air. Chomsky has said that in the American media, quote, either repeat the same conventional doctrines everybody is saying, or else you say something true, and it will sound like it's from Neptune. Today is January 24th, a day of ambiguous revolution. So it's not January 24th?
25th.
I'm off by a day. That's what happens when I make up my notes the night before. January 25th, a day of ambiguous. At least last week I got the month wrong, Ron. So I mean, you know, this is progress.
Hey, you're improving.
Exactly. January 25th, a day of ambiguous revolution. On this day in AD 41, after a night of negotiation, Claudius of the Julian gens was accepted as Roman emperor by the Senate. Claudius, if is recognized at all by our contemporaries, maybe from the excellent production 20 years ago by the BBC of I, Claudius, a production of Robert Graves' very interesting novel from the 1930s with the excellent actor Derek Jacobi as the principal figure. Claudius, presented by Graves in a novel that is still very much worth reading, even though they did do a good television version of it, is presented as the first emperor, the fourth emperor in the usual enumeration of ancient Rome, whose primary concern as emperor is the restoration of the Republic, because, of course, under the Roman imperial system, the fiction was the Republic was still in place, but that an emergency leader, as it were, had taken on the role of princeps, the control of imperator, military title, of the empire. And Claudius is presented in both the novel and the television series as understanding perfectly well how the Republic had decayed and looking for ways, in fact, to restore it. And he's constantly defeated in this, so much so that the actual historian Claudius is sometimes referred to as the first Roman emperor, because he's the first who used the full powers of the new system, realizing that the Republic was gone. Today is also the anniversary in 1787 of the major military engagement of Shays' Rebellion in Massachusetts. The largest military confrontation of that important event in the early history of the American Republic occurred outside the Springfield Armory in Massachusetts, when the revolution of poor farmers who were being despoiled by those who had done well out of the war, out of the Revolutionary War, gathered together to prevent the dispossession of their farms by closing down the courts that were doing it in Massachusetts. Well, the Massachusetts authorities, in this case the well-to-do of Massachusetts, called out the militia, the military form of the state, to confront these rebels. The desperados, as they were called by Abigail Adams. Interesting use of that word from those days. But the leaders of the American Revolution, such as the Adams family, understood perfectly well this was a continuation of the Revolution, the social dimensions of the Revolution, and that it had to be put down if the proper people were to be in charge of the new republic. Well, the militia was to do that job, but when the militia got to Springfield, there was, in fact, a military engagement, but not the engagement that the wealthy expected, because half the militia went over to Shays' group, joined it, and the militia, although they received some casualties in the confrontation. There were, in fact, 4 militia members killed. The major result was not the defeat of Shays' Rebellion, but the increase of its numbers. That's important because the Constitution that is presumably enforced in the United States today was formed directly as a result of Shays' Rebellion to establish a strong enough central authority to put down rebellions like Shays and his friends. And the Constitution drawn up in Philadelphia in the next summer had as its primary purpose the ending of this sort of social revolution. 2 years ago today, the first wave of the Egyptian Revolution began in Egypt with a series of street demonstrations, marches, rallies, acts of civil disobedience, riots, labor strikes, and violent clashes in Cairo and other cities in Egypt. Now, this again was the case of a decayed republic. The republic was established in Egypt with the revolution of 1952, but in fact it had been directed by a strong man and close family friend of the Clinton family, President, he retained the title, Mubarak. And the revolution against a decayed republic in Egypt was the essential event in the so-called Arab Spring. And that story is not over by any means. Some would suggest the stories of the Shays' Rebellion and indeed of Claudius' decayed republic aren't over either. Nothing is ever finished in history, and that may be one of the few bases we have for hope. So you're watching News from Neptune, the Despotic Republic edition. A presumed republic becomes a despotic empire, and you have a couple of dyspeptic reporters, a trio of dyspeptic reporters to respond to that. Dyspeptic comes from the Greek, which Claudius spoke, dyspeptos, which means difficult to digest or hard to swallow. And the corruption of a republic seems to me to be something that is hard to swallow and that we are being asked to swallow today. So we will discuss these matters, and Ron Szoke will cough up the first political hairball here.
Well, yes, well, I will extend somewhat the theme of the reign of mendacity and refer to an article that appeared on Yahoo News from Associated Press, Frankfurt, Germany. Public trust in business, government, and the media leaders has fallen in the wake of financial and political scandals, according to a new global survey. This was taken in anticipation of the meeting in Davos of the supposed world financial leaders high up at a luxury ski resort in the Swiss Alps. And I haven't been hearing much out of that meeting yet, although ultimately it may have a great deal of an effect on our lives and fortunes, such as they are.
Probably because Thomas Friedman has decided
Yes.
not to attend this year.
Right. They're looking at the trust barometer and trying to diagnose about why it has decreased. People seem to distrust their supposed leaders more than ever. A big problem, this says, is that people think their leaders just can't get around to telling them the truth.
Hey, we think we found the problem.
Yeah, right. So, one of the glaring results they find is that 50% of respondents trusted business in general to do what is right. Only 18% trusted business leaders to tell the truth. A 32% point gap between the institution itself and the people in charge. which is interesting how people can make that separation in their minds. The rate for government was even worse on the whole. The survey measured rising levels of trust for non-government organizations. The trust is now being placed in an expert, such as an academic or in a peer, someone your friends on Facebook or whatever. Amazing gullibility of people who construct their reality out of face-to-face encounters and sometimes out of the verbiage of online pundits and even on television.
Does this mean I shouldn't friend you on Facebook, Ron?
You certainly should, but I'll be appropriately skeptical at all times. Right. The crisis of leadership is leading to people having a very different view of who they may listen to. They want to listen to people who are like themselves. This reaches crazy proportions. And people want their supposed leaders, the top politicians, to be like themselves. And this is one of the strong points, apparently in favor of Sarah Palin, is that a lot of people felt that she was just like them. So,
I certainly did.
yeah. Among the informed public group, 69% viewed an academic or expert as a credible spokesperson. That's kind of naive. While 61% looked to a person like yourself. CEOs lagged at 43% among this group. So the most trusted business sector was technology with a 77% credibility rate, which is kind of amusing. But while banks and financial services trailed with 50%, just behind the news media, which polled 53%. So who do you trust? Who do you believe? My own answer is nobody completely. But anyway, news item. Critics brand him as anti-business, anti-Wall Street, yet President Obama's first term was bullish for stocks. S&P 500 up 85% during those 4 years.
Surprise.
Yeah. Using the Dow Jones Industrial Average, Obama ranks third in first-term stock performance of all presidents. Franklin D. Roosevelt is number one, and Clinton number two, says the Bespoke Investment Group. So that's interesting. Those who think that the Democrats, the liberals, are anti-business or whatever, it turns out to be just the opposite. I've heard from people who've analyzed the results that in Democratic administrations, actually Wall Street at least does better than under Republican administrations, contrary to what a lot of people seem to believe, that the Republicans are the business party. But if anything, they're the party of only small business. Next step. Joseph Stiglitz, the eminent economist whose credentials cannot be faulted, it seems to me. Inequality, he says, is holding back the recovery. We've entered a stage of extreme, massive inequality, unlike anything since the 1920s in this country, or maybe back to the 1890s. He says there are four major reasons inequality is squelching our recovery. The most immediate is that our middle class is too weak to support the consumer spending that has historically driven our economic growth. So we're constantly told that consumer spending is 70% of the economy, and the economic downturn has decreased that spending, and so we're seeing the results in lower prosperity for everyone and lower tax receipts and so on. Second, the hollowing out of the middle class since the 1970s, a phenomenon interrupted only briefly in the 1990s, meaning that people are unable to invest in their future. Third, the weakness of the middle class is holding back tax receipts, again, which contributes to government deficits. Fourth, inequality is associated with more frequent and more severe boom and bust cycles. And we're likely to be seeing more and more of those unless some of the advice from economists like Stiglitz and Krugman, I dare say, and others begins to be heeded. Alan Blinder, another economist who was on the Federal Reserve Board, I believe. Financial collapse, a 10-step recovery plan. He advocates now for overcoming this distrust and the economic difficulties that we're in. Remember that people forget. Treasury Secretary Geithner lamented last year that before the crisis, there was no memory of extreme crisis, no memory of what can happen when a nation allows huge amounts of risk to build up. As the renegade economist Hyman Minsky knew, he's been commented on before in this program, it is normal for speculative markets to go to extremes. Periods of prosperity will be followed by over-optimism and speculation, which will lead to the inevitable result. 2, do not rely on self-regulation. There's this really funny line you keep hearing. We will self-regulate this industry. Terrible BS. Honor thy shareholders. Elevate risk management. Use less leverage, which means primarily not investing with borrowed money. Keep it simple, stupid. Standardize derivatives and trade them on exchanges. Now there's a kind of mysterious half-hidden market in all of these derivatives and other kinds of securities that no one really knows about and can regulate. Keep things on the balance sheet. It's become a favorite trick. Keep things off budget, off the balance sheet. It's well known, for example, that an enormous part of government expenditures are off the budget, the so-called black budget, covering intelligence and some military activities. Fix perverse compensation, the way that these leaders and corporate executives get compensated is perverse, and it needs to be fixed. Watch out for consumers. That's number 10. The meek won't inherit their fair share of the earth if they are constantly being fleeced. What we learned in the crisis is that failure to protect unsophisticated consumers from financial predators can undermine the whole economy. That surprising lesson mustn't be forgotten. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau should institutionalize it. And of course, it's just this that led to the really rabid opposition to Elizabeth Warren being on the relevant Senate committee. So Mark Twain has said, Mr. Blinder points out, to have equipped that while history doesn't repeat itself, it does rhyme. There will be financial crises in the future. The next one won't be a carbon copy of the last. Neither, however, will it be so different that these commandments won't apply. Financial history does rhyme, but we're already forgetting the meter. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Ron. David, what do you think? Should we not follow leaders and watch the parking meters?
2 comments, just Bob Dylan aside.
Look, I just like the suggestion that people trust folks like themselves. I mean, you know, and we've instanced Joseph Stiglitz here. I like the idea that people should trust mature men with chin whiskers, like Joseph Stiglitz and Paul Krugman and maybe some other folks around. Huh?
Yeah.
It's interesting in the book, The Social Determinants of Knowledge, who is it, Berger and Luckman, that they talk about how people construct their reality is primarily, in the first instance, out of face-to-face interaction, their conversations with people.
It just generalizes the point that those things that we think we know because we've been told them by people we trust. I don't know Australia is an island. I don't even know the Earth is round from my own direct experience, but I've been told that by people I trust, and therefore I believe it. Sorry, David.
Who do you trust, David?
Yeah.
Well, no. The thing, for instance, small business people who are lauded and assume that they create most jobs when they actually don't. One thing I've always wondered is that if you look at the percentage of jobs and small businesses in the social welfare states of Northern Europe, one will find in accordance, correlation between the size of government and the amount of the economy in which small business operates in relation to larger corporate and enterprises.
A positive correlation.
Yeah, positive
Yeah.
And it only makes sense that an economy in which government spending maintains consumer spending and redistributes wealth is better for business in general, and especially small business in particular. So what I don't understand is why small business people in this society don't do their own research, speak for themselves, and oppose the policies that are supported by the larger corporate and banking interests that actually run this country. I mean, a couple of weeks or a month can't go by in this local newspaper without some reference to the business climate. And the business climate for small business is particularly bad because of the lack of government spending.
Yep.
Well, you need a massive public education campaign to get people to believe nonsense like that. And of course, we have it. I mean, mendacity in high places turns out to be effective. That one thing the American experiment has demonstrated is that you can find ways to lie to people and get them act in opposition to their own interests.
Right.
Works pretty well. The point that it seems to me that perhaps should be emphasized with the current administration is that poor people need money, and that it's nothing short of scandalous that the Obama administration came into office with in the midst of the Great Recession with the obvious clear responsibility to provide jobs. That what the economy needed was people with money buying things, and people didn't have money because they didn't have jobs, and that the first thing the administration should have done upon coming to office is institute a modern version of the Works Progress Administration from the New Deal, a program that simply give people jobs anybody who needed a job would get one in a program established by the sort of government that David is talking about. They didn't do that. They didn't even suggest, although they were told, of course, by people like Joseph Stiglitz and Paul Krugman and some of the others, how necessary that was. They, of course, didn't do it, and the mendacity machine worked so well that even the people who were suggesting that fell silent. And someone like Krugman or Stiglitz would say, well, of course, that's what they should do, but since that's not going to happen, let's talk about something else maybe they might do. That's a pretty amazing circumstance that can be attributed only to a control of the public mind that would be the envy of any 20th century totalitarian. Nobody else does it the way we do.
I recall September of 2008, in the midst of the financial crisis, the real coming together of the financial crisis, and I watched in amazement one day as the Congress turned down the bailout package, voted down the bailout package because of public outcry against it, and Obama, who was a senator at that time running for president, along with many other people, came back to Washington to make sure that the banks got their bailout.
Exactly.
How could anybody have doubted Obama's basic plan beyond that? You know, if it didn't take that, it certainly took his immediate hiring of Timothy Geithner, the previously mentioned Timothy Geithner, and Lawrence Summers and so forth, after taking office to run his economic program. So it shouldn't have been any mystery as early as September. It shouldn't have been any mystery before that, because it was clear during the campaign that Obama was a man of very hollow words and of giving these kind of theatrical performances on the campaign trail, that there wasn't any substance to them, and that the lack of substance to them could only mean that the only substance, once he actually got power, would be substance in favor of the ownership class. So I'm only surprised that, as much allowance as it's perhaps understandable, as much time as people wanted to give him, and we continue to, you can pick up the newspaper this morning and read a Charles Krauthammer column in which Obama is seen as a raving leftist, and it was never true for 1 second, and it certainly was recognized by it. Could not have been failed. It could. Any true leftist, whatever that might be, couldn't have failed to recognize this well before he was actually elected president in 2008.
But it's important to see that Obama was not alone in this regard. This was not a peculiar failing of Barack Obama. He was in fact quite right in line. We're talking now about the TARP, the original bailout of the banks. That the Black Caucus in the Congress, the Progressive Caucus, good liberals across the board said this was necessary, and it showed the extent to which liberalism was essentially a vaccination for the body politic. The body politic had suddenly done something right. They'd seen that this was a raid on the Treasury by the banks, and that the crisis was going to be used as the basis for a remarkable bailout of private banks and private profit, and that instead what the government should do is something that would indeed produce economic benefits for the entire society. That couldn't be done, and it had to be the progressives who told us that couldn't be done, that what had to be done was the banks had to be made whole, they were too big to fail, etc. So, I mean, the real role, the historic role of American progressivism was illustrated here. And Barack Obama, of course, had been positioning himself all along to be a beneficiary of that particular movement, as indeed he is. So, in some sense, we get what we paid for, right?
Yeah, and I mean, just to recap the history, in case you've forgotten it, 4.5 years later, is that I think the original congressional turn down of the bailout was like on a Monday or Tuesday, upon which it went into panic mode. The PR machine, the Wall Street machine went into panic mode, and I forget whether it took till Thursday or Friday or the following Monday or Tuesday before they were all back voting for the bailout package, with perhaps a little something added to appease those who were concerned about the people that were losing their homes. None of which really ever came to amount to a whole lot.
Exactly.
Was that the time that John McCain broke off campaigning, went back to Washington?
Well, I think they both did. Yes, I think both Obama and McCain did that.
You're watching News from Neptune, presented each week at this time by Urbana Public Television, and we'll press on to David Green. You got another topic for us to chew on, David?
Well,
more mendacity in some places.
It's related. We can't really get off this topic today because of all of this blizzard of so-called research and analysis regarding the relationship between technology and jobs. What we've had in the News Gazette this week is a 3-part AP story which plays on the theme mentioned by Ron, that jobs disappear, the middle class is hollowed out because technology, the so-called progress in technology means that we don't need not just people doing menial work, certain kinds of menial work, but more often people doing what is called middle-class work, or at least work that is rewarded with what are defined as middle-class wages, something like $36,000 to $58,000 or $68,000, something in those lines. There's a lot, again, there's a lot of nonsense to go through. There's a lot of economists saying this and that, the other thing about all of this, and the forest is always missed for the trees of these basic trends, and the forest is that when when technology makes progress, that means that fewer workers are needed to produce the same amount of goods. Society should benefit from that. And the question is, how can society benefit from that? Not only is it that when technology makes progress and produces more goods and services with less labor, government must compensate for that, because if government doesn't compensate for that, then, as Ron mentioned before, there will be these cycles of lower profits, of financial and real estate speculation that will eventually, as Hyman Minsky and many others have pointed out, will run the economy off the rails. So it is assumed in this discourse on technology, there's a kind of technological determinism at work here that inevitably creates these not financial crises that can be dealt with by the government, or crises in the use of labor, but crises that somehow are just inevitable in relationship to people being thrown out of work, and then government revenues going down. And what do we do? What do we do? Well, there are obvious things to be done, as have already been mentioned on this program. But the discourse, as we witness it in this 3-part AP series, and in there's references. I'll give you a few references. There's an economist, the latest economist entering into this fray is an MIT economist named David Autor, A-U-T-O-R, who's written a paper. And all you need to do is to look at the origins of this paper. It's called the Hamilton Project, I think it's called. If you look at the people who support the Hamilton Project, just like if you look at the people who support the Fix the Debt Project, the Hamilton Project is Robert Rubin, one of Clinton's cronies, one of the former Citicorp, Goldman Sachs, Clinton crony, who's very much responsible for the financial crisis of 2008, and very much responsible for the kind of policies and mentalities that have run our economy into the circumstances that it has now. Well, they're interested in promoting the Hamilton Project and this David Autor, which has been challenged by the Economic Policy Institute and Lawrence Michel and the Center for Economic and Policy Research, Dean Baker. All this debate about where have the jobs gone and why have they gone there? Again, just not with the good leftist response to the MIT and Hamilton Project an analysis is that the government needs to step in to provide the jobs and labor and the well-paid labor to compensate for this, so that society will actually benefit from so-called technological progress. But the conventional wisdom is that this is a sort of a natural force which somehow is visited upon us, which must cause us to panic in various ways, but not to do the things that can obviously be done.
Exactly.
So must we pay homage to the specter or the goddess Tina, T-I-N-A, there is no alternative. And a lot of people want us to believe that. But really, I think there are alternatives in many cases.
Yeah, Tina's best-known devotee, of course, from the last generation was Margaret Thatcher. And the triumph of neoliberalism in the UK and the US was under the aegis of Tina. There is no alternative. The sort of determinism, both economic and technological, that we're talking about here, saying, well, look, we're in a box here. I mean, this has got to happen. People simply have to downsize their lifestyles because the economy can't stand it, or technology can't stand it. And therefore, that's all there is to it. And this is, a massive lie, mendacity on a very large large scale, because of course these are programs, economic programs that fall under the general name of neoliberalism, that are conscious programs to impoverish the middle class, to hollow out the middle class, as Ron said. That was the aim of the program, to destroy the welfare state, to destroy the attempt in the generation after the Second World War to mollify the demands of labor in the 20th century by producing a supportive state, a state that provided, one way or another, employment and social supports, while not damaging the profits of the very few. Now, that's what fell apart, really, in the 1970s, when the very few decided there were more profits to be made by squeezing the middle class, by destroying the welfare state, rather than by supporting them. And we're at the end of almost 40 years of vicious class struggle in this country that dare not speak its name. It had to be lied about. Mendacity on high. The technological series that David was talking about, of course, is based in somewhat, is countered by the work we mentioned on this program a couple of weeks ago of the late economist and historian, really, David Noble, who talked about the way in which technology in the modern economy was not fixed, was not a given, was not a matter of determinism, just as the economy was not a matter of determinism, but a matter of policy choices. And that the rich who profit from it had to convince the majority that what they were doing was inevitable. They were locked into it. This is the way it has to work. And that's the smell of mendacity that has been so remarkably successful in the American economy.
And
politics.
one of the issues raised in this AP series, I'm not sure if it was in one of these three articles or sort of a sidebar, had to do with Luddites, also something
Yes.
that David Noble addressed in his own
Right.
work. And we've, again, talking about this historical misconception of why the Luddites attacked machines that were threatening their livelihoods,
Right.
and what it is that they really wanted in the early 1800s, what kind of response they wanted. It wasn't that they didn't want their work to be easier. It isn't that they didn't want to be able to produce more. It's that they wanted control over their work, and they didn't want the technological process to be the end of their livelihoods.
Exactly. Homage to Ned Ludd is a good place to start, and I recommend the passages in Peter Linebaughl's recent book on the Magna Carta for the roots and the depths of this particular tradition. You're watching News from Neptune. I have a more specific example of mendacity to bring up from this week's news. This is from a note that I want to present this note because it seems to me that it's a wonderful example of how progressive mendacity works in this country. This is from a group called Think Progress. Think Progress is not to put too fine a point on it, a public relations operation of the Center for American Progress. The Center for American Progress, and the names are wonderful, is a Clintonoid, that is a right-wing Democratic Party organization that was run for a long time by President Bill Clinton's Chief of Staff, John Podesta, and staffed by people out of the Clinton administration, and represented, as I say, that sort of right wing of the Democratic Party. And that's saying something, of course, because the Democratic Party is contrary to popular mythology, not left-wing at all. But in any case, that's what the Center for American Progress was, and that's what Think Progress, that's what it is. And Think Progress is, as I say, their PR organ. Now, they published an article, they put out an article, the idea is their articles are spread abroad by other news media, under the title, GOP Senator pushes gun-running conspiracy theory during Benghazi hearing, close quote. That was published Wednesday of this week by Think Progress. And the thing has to be seen in its full glory to appreciate, I think, what's going on here. The article begins, Senator Rand Paul, Republican for Kentucky, a notable hate object for the Clintonoid wing of the Democratic Party. Senator Rand Paul used today's hearing on the Benghazi attack to confront Secretary of State Hillary Clinton about a conspiracy theory involving moving guns from Libya to Syrian rebels. Now, this is wonderful. I mean, this is here's conspiracy theory in the first line, and the report on the hearings that are going on in Congress now, having to do with the events in Benghazi, begins with the notion that this libertarian senator, if that's what he is confronting Hillary Clinton with a conspiracy theory. Paul, a new member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, wasted no time in making a mark on the proceedings. After informing Secretary Clinton that he would have fired her for her role in the response to the attack, Paul came seemingly out of nowhere. Look, you can't make this up. Paul came seemingly out of nowhere to ask Clinton about Turkey. What a thing to do. How could Rand Paul, this is Rand Paul, the son, not the father, how could he possibly ask about Turkey? Quote, is the U.S. involved with any procuring of weapons, transfer of weapons, buying, selling, anyhow transferring weapons to Turkey out of Libya? Close quote, question mark, close quote, he asked. A clearly confused Clinton responded to the best of her ability. I mean, you can only ask a woman to do so much, right? Clinton, to Turkey? I will have to take that question for the record. Nobody has ever raised that with me. Paul, it's been in news reports that ships have been leaving from Libya and that they may have weapons. And what I'd like to know is the NX that was close by, were they involved with procuring, buying, selling, obtaining weapons, and were any of these weapons being transferred to other countries, any countries, Turkey included? And then the Think Progress account gives you, you can watch on video this whole exchange. What they're not telling you here is what is going on with this whole Benghazi affair, which is being presented as a conspiracy theory by Republicans to attack the Secretary of State, who was blindsided by it, didn't know what was going on. The Benghazi installation that was attacked and resulting in the death of an American diplomat was a CIA installation, not a consulate, as has been said by the administration all along. And there is serious evidence that the primary action, the primary responsibility in the days before the attack in Benghazi on this consulate, on this CIA mission, which the administration pretended was a consulate, the primary activity was running guns and jihadists to Syria. That's what Rand Paul is referring to. That's what he's talking about, because it was via Turkey that these guns and fighters, remember, I mean, we have the peculiar phenomenon here that the United States, which put together the Mujahideen in the first place, that put together the jihadi fighters that became al-Qaeda in one spot, that the United States that did this during the Democratic administration of President Carter is once again in Syria using these same people as they have used them before in order to produce foreign policy goals, in order to affect foreign policy goals in Syria. Okay, this is what Rand Paul was asking about. The information is out there, the information that the Obama administration does not want public, that the U.S. government does not want public, is all there. But here it's presented, and Mrs. Clinton plays dumb. The question of the real operation of the Benghazi station and the reason for its attack was what's at stake. Interestingly, in this pro-Democratic Party report, it says Clinton responded that Paul would have to take up his question, quote, with the agency running the NX, close quote. That's all she said about it. She didn't say who was the agency running the NX and why she should now use NX for the for the place that has been called a consulate by the American government.
That's because they were separated. They were separate things.
They
were
weren't-
short distance apart, but they were
They were not. There was no consulate there. They were. This was the office, the CIA office, but the agency running the NX, you don't deny, was the CIA, right? An oblique reference to the fact that Central Intelligence Agency was operating out of the building in question. Paul's inquiry about Turkey seems less odd if you're familiar with the Glenn Beck-inspired conspiracy theories that had been circulating among right-wing websites since the attack in Libya. What they're referring to is the notion that the purpose of this installation was to run guns and fighters into Syria. That's not doubt. That is not, in fact, in doubt. The theory, this is the conspiracy theory, that Ambassador Chris Stevens, who was killed during the attack, was deeply involved in the CIA project of gathering loose arms in Libya, well, loose as if they were lying on the ground, and he went around and picked them up and sent them off, in the aftermath of Muammar Gaddafi's downfall. Stevens then facilitated the movement of those arms from Libya to Turkey, where they went on to Syria. Now, remember, this is the same operation that had done the same thing in Libya before. And one of the reasons that the Benghazi annex was attacked. The secrecy involved in moving these weapons under the table is part of why the Obama administration covered up the truth of the attack, according to the theory, which even Fox News itself read. You look at this conspiracy theory these people are putting around. Glenn Beck and Fox News spreading this conspiracy theory that the CIA was gathering arms and fighters and sending them into Syria. How dare Rand Paul ask Ms. Clinton about that? The Obama administration has repeatedly said that it will not be providing arms to the rebels in Syria. No, it does it a roundabout by way through Qatar and a half dozen other places, which this theory claims to counter. While the CIA was involved with helping round up the loose arms that were rampant in Libya, what? They just admitted? There is no evidence that Stevens or the State Department was involved in the operation. Oh, the CIA was doing it, but there's no evidence that Stevens and the State Department were doing it, nor that the arms were then shipped to Syria. That Senator Paul would use his first hearing on the Foreign Relations Committee to push this theory, despite the fact, even if it were true, it would fall outside of Secretary Clinton's purview, does not say great things about his future on the body. So Paul is a conspiracy theorist because he puts out this theory, which even if it's true, Think Progress says, and there's a very good indication, that is quite true, it wouldn't be Mrs. Clinton's responsibility. So how dare he offer a conspiracy theory? John, you're not happy with this?
Well, can I just ask, really, because I'm a little vague on some of the background, what is the prequel, as they say now in movies, what is the prequel to the Libya attack? I mean, we supported the insurgents in Benghazi in eastern Libya starting 2 years ago, or maybe less than 2 years ago now. So I assume there were relationships built up between our, these quote unquote good guys who were out to overthrow Gaddafi that we ended up aiding. So who were the people? Who is it alleged who the people are who wanted to see Americans dead? I mean, how do these people relate to the people that we actually supported? I mean, is this all just blowback or what or what? Maybe it's not known yet.
I think it's not known. In fact, the best account that I've been able to find of the answer to that is by the excellent reporter Pepe Escobar, writing in Asian Times Online. And the suggestion is that these are that the attack on the NX in Benghazi, that started this whole kerfuffle on Capitol Hill was done precisely by those who objected to the CIA moiling about in the Arab Spring. Now, how these people are related to the fighters the CIA has been recruiting for more than a generation to produce its effects in the Middle East is not clear. Is it blowback, as you suggest? Does it represent something like Al-Qaeda itself, which was, of course, originally used by the U.S. to harass the Russians, and then ended up being a resistance movement to invasion by both Russia and the United States of their regions of interest? So who did the attack on the Benghazi CIA station seems to me not clear, but it surely were people who objected to the fact that what the CIA station was doing, which was transferring arms and fighters into Syria.
But they might have been people who we in some way supported.
Absolutely.
Beginning 2 years ago.
Absolutely.
And the same, I know, I'll just make a brief comment. The disconnect, again, is in Mali also.
Yep.
There's only one article I've found, a guy named Thomas Mountain, who's writing on Counterpunch, who suggests that the Saudis are funding the rebellion in northern Mali. And so there's always, and I haven't seen that anywhere else. So maybe he's an outlier in this regard, but still there's blowback aspects to northern Mali in relation to Libya, in relation to our support of the people who overthrew Gaddafi, and then arms flowing from Libya to northern Mali. So, I mean, you can't say that American policies haven't created all this conflict, and that, in some general sense, that this is all blowback.
Yep. Pepe Escobar, whose column I mentioned a moment ago, has been following the same line, and once again, one of the few people who's been doing so.
Does he have any actual evidence for this, or is it just someone's opinion?
Well, the question is, what actually happened here? What happened in 9/11? I mean, was it the result of religious fanaticism, as the late Christopher Hitchens would argue, or was it really bound up with the American policy in the Middle East?
Yes and yes.
But it was not just religious fanaticism then, was it?
No.
Yes. The question of the conspiracy theory that the Democrats are alleging in regard to the Benghazi affair is the notion that the CIA was involved in shipping arms into Syria, with Benghazi as being a center for the planning and arrangement of this arm and fighter transfer. That seems clear.
Are you saying that Rand Paul did not have a conspiracy theory?
I'm saying that it's not a conspiracy theory. In fact, conspiracy theory was my suggestion for Coburn's Corner these days, or in this particular meeting. Yeah. It was not a conspiracy theory in the dismissive sense that phrase usually has. Rand Paul, the crazy libertarian, has a conspiracy theory which can't possibly be true. In fact, he has a theory about a conspiracy, a CIA conspiracy to run guns into Syria that looks like being quite true. And that's why I was going to suggest that conspiracy theory was the leading candidate for the guillotine in Coburn's Corner.
Well, we should always keep in mind there have been some conspiracies. That's right. Some conspiracy theories may well be true.
Exactly.
But I think we need to be careful about them. Imputing thoughts, intentions, motives, plans to other people again.
I mean,
but Truth Progress here wants to call this a conspiracy theory in order to say that there's no truth to it. That's the point. What Rand Paul was asking Mrs. Clinton about the transfer of arms to Syria under CIA direction, that happens to be true.
She was there to talk about something else. The hearing was called to talk about what happened in the attack on the embassy, or whatever you choose to call it, in Benghazi. And so they tried to divert it into a general attack on
So Paul raises
Clinton.
the perfectly reasonable question about why the embassy was attacked. Why embassy? It wasn't an embassy. Why the CIA station was attacked, which the administration keeps wanting to call a consulate. Why was it attacked? The answer that he was looking for, that she claimed no knowledge of, that he had to take up with the agency involved, was the United States was using this to run arms into the Syrian civil war.
Yeah.
That's
So-
what he was looking for.
So this would be another thesis about someone's thoughts, motives, and intentions.
No, it's about what it meant, what the question meant. She says Turkey. How did Turkey possibly get involved in this? It's clear how Turkey got involved in that.
I mean, I'm not sure that even Rand Paul really wants to get the bottom of that. I mean, Rand Paul is not Ron Paul.
That's true.
He's not, he's not a critic of U.S. foreign policy in the way that his father is. So I don't know what his. I mean, it's possible that his motives in all this, we like to talk about motives, are not exactly to find out the truth if it reflects poorly on the Republican Party line or the Democratic Party line. I mean, there is a certain petty political aspect about this, even if he does maybe want to get at a truth, Carl, that you think ought to be gotten at.
Well, the truth that ought to be gotten at is what the United States is actually doing here, what the United States continues to do. The circumstance that resulted in the death of Ambassador Stevens, which seems to be what the Republicans wanted to talk about, in some sense, that's only part of the general story of American policy in the region, policy which is continuous and ongoing, and policy which involves the U.S. in nefarious activities throughout the Arab Spring. That's the story that we need to hear, and I thought the most interesting part about this article was that a source extremely sympathetic to the administration wanted to suggest that any such discussion was coming from some crazy place where libertarians live. Well, maybe it was, but it also has the unfortunate characteristic of being true.
So you think they're biased, Carl?
Yeah, I think they're biased.
We need to talk about that.
I think there's some bias going on
Yeah, that's
there.
going to be a major topic
Yeah.
of mine sometime. Is what is bias, and who has it, who doesn't, and how do you prove the case either way?
Well,
That's interesting.
It seems to me it's more important to talk about how the truth of things stands. What was the U.S. actually doing in Benghazi?
Yeah, I get it, Carl.
What is the
what
U.S.
you say is
doing
the truth,
today?
what other people say is a myth.
Oh,
Right?
come on, Ron. The point is to find out what those things are going on there. We're from Neptune, if only because we're trying to say what the truth is.
Well, tell us, Carl. Tell us what the truth is about
I'll do
these
my
matters.
best, Ron. I know you do too. So, if in the American media you can say the same conventional things everyone does, or you can try to say something that's true, and it will sound like it's from Neptune. You've been watching News from Neptune, and my discussants tonight have been David Green and Ron Szoke. I'm Carl Estabrook. This and other editions of our program will be seen on the website newsfromneptune.com and on Facebook. I can be reached at carl@newsfromneptune.com and on Facebook, and I'm happy to receive your comments. Our thanks, as usual, to Urbana Public Television, especially Jake, Jason, and Caleb. Inshallah, we'll be back next week with a new edition of News from Neptune. To remind you, in the words of Edward de Vere, what's past is prologue, what to come, and yours and my discharge. In the meantime, confusion to our enemies, and a good night to you.